Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tatsumi. So I now have the distinct pleasure of introducing you all to our speakers for this morning. So I have them pinned on my screen, and hopefully that is showing on yours, or put yourself in speaker view, whatever is easiest for you to join us this morning. First up, our moderator is Candice Nash. Candice Nash is the DE&I manager for Toyota, and she's responsible for consulting with senior leaders as they develop customized DE&I strategies to enable their organizations to have a positive and lasting impact. Candice has been with Toyota since 2004 and has had several roles in human resources and talent development. Next up in our panel, we have John Logging. John Logging is the Director of Credit Risk for Toyota Financial Savings Bank. He has been with Toyota since 2007 and has had several roles, including in commercial lending, sales operations, and credit. And he is currently in Henderson, Nevada. So he said he would send us pictures of sunshine this morning, because if you are all local like I am in Plano, it's a bit dreary outside. Next up, we have Susan Gutierrez, who is the Marketing Dealer Engagement Manager for Toyota Financial Services. She's active in several business partnering groups, or maybe known to you all as employee resource groups, or ERGs. She's formerly served as the co-chair for Women Impacting and Influencing Toyota, the largest business partnering group in Toyota. And last but certainly not least, we have Tom Trisdale. Tom Trisdale is the Vice President of Quality for Toyota Motor North America, located right here in Plano. Over the course of his career with Toyota, he has progressed through a series of positions in after sales in Toyota Motor North America's quality division in support of product quality assurance, service campaign, and recall administration, service technology, diagnostics, and quality information systems. So if you could not all tell, these are very impressive folks we have joining us this morning. So I will hand this over to Candice to begin our conversation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Heather, for the warm welcome and the opportunity to address the Plano Chamber. It's our pleasure to be with you all today, and we look forward to this discussion. So as you heard Tatsumi say, our journey to male allyship really did begin a few years ago, and it continues to evolve today. One of our executives, who you'll have an opportunity to hear from in a few minutes, attended Jennifer Brown's session, as again, you heard Tatsumi mention, and began to follow her on social media. And by following this consulting group, we learned about a conference called the Better Man Conference. And we actually had an opportunity to attend last week. So you'll hear in real time a little bit about that conference and what we learned. So in learning about this conference, John, who you'll hear from in just a moment, just felt it was interesting enough to share that with us and the D&I team. And that is really what propelled this journey. So we were able to really look at best practices and really begin to shape what the male ally journey would look like for Toyota, as well as identify some natural advocates that would help us move this vision forward. And that's who you're going to hear from today. So I don't want to steal too much of your thunder, John, but what I did want to mention before we get into our conversation is the fact that our collaborative approach enabled John to come to us, the D&I team. And I just want to elevate that, we really have a natural system in place where it's not all on the D&I team, but we really count on our executives and our team members to bring ideas forward. And we work through kind of moving through these initiatives in a collaborative way. So with that stage set, John, let's start with you sharing what male allyship is and why the topic is important to you.
Yeah, thanks, Candice, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's what I'll say is Tatsumi pointed out, I was in Plano for a while. We have the opportunity to attend these various sessions. 5 years ago, I sat in a presentation by Jennifer Brown, and I will tell the group, I'm not a social media person. I pretty much stay away from that, but the only social media I will play in is LinkedIn. So I followed Jennifer Brown on LinkedIn. One of the things about Jennifer Brown, and I can't tell you what it was, connected with me, and I realized that maybe I could make a difference. Candice asked the question for me earlier, what got me here? I watched my wife, who I met through work, who I think is the consummate professional and could run circles around pretty much every man I knew, including myself, never get the opportunity. And I couldn't do anything about that because I wasn't at the same organization anymore, but I found myself in a position at Toyota where I thought I could. And so I reached out to Tatsumi and Stephen Lewis, who I see is on the call as well. And they encouraged me to go to this conference. So I went, and I was the sole member from Toyota who went. And I found it worthwhile. And so I came back to them. This was 5 years ago, first conference we went to, just myself. We followed it up with 10 or 12 people. Tatsumi was there, Susan was there as well. And to Candice's point, the progression we've made this last week, we had, 15, 16 people in person and something like 50 virtually that participated in it. And so, for me, and I suspect it will be for everyone, it was a personal journey, something that was close to me that I was in a position to make a difference. I thought I was inspired by Jennifer Brown and then the reactions I got from my colleagues at Toyota. And so I didn't let go, if you will, but then I was also really fortunate that I had people like Tatsumi and Susan and Stephen and many others, Frank, who couldn't make the call. And I see Sandra on the call here as well. There were a number of others, including ones I never met, that kept pushing it forward. So, so for me, it was a personal story and, excuse me, an opportunity, I think, to do something about it. And so I did. And like I said, I had wonderful support here at the organization. So I guess my message to those of you that are on the call or that you speak to your colleagues or friends is find something that connects with you and be part of the movement, if you will. That's what it was for me. And hopefully you have a supportive organization. And I would suspect that the people on this call would be supportive as well, even if they didn't know you and you reached out to them. So I don't know. Candice, I'll keep within my time limit here. So hopefully.
Oh, no, you're totally fine. Thank you for sharing those insights. And in particular, thank you for making the connection to your personal attachment, right? I think a lot of times the things that move us and inspire us are things that we're able to connect to personally. So thank you for your transparency in sharing how it really started at home for you. And so I will kind of put in a follow-up question though. What were some of the insights that you gained last week as it related to us being at the Better Man Conference? What were some of the highlights that you'd like to share for those who are interested in understanding a little bit more about the Better Man Conference?
There were a couple of data points that they shared, and I don't like to get too lost in data, but data is important. Two ones that really stood out to me, Candice. One is that I think, if I'm not mistaken, the population of college graduates today that are women versus men, it's 60% of college graduates today are women. And so that's to me, it should be an eye-opening conversation for a number of people. And then the other one from a data point that stood out was that they did a survey, and there were several hundred of us around the world that were virtually, and then there was in person in San Francisco and some in New York. And as Candice, you remember, they took a survey. We did a survey of how many people in the audience thought that they were allies, that they behaved in some way that were allies. And that number was well into the upper 80%. And then they showed data from, I believe they were just really the English-speaking countries, the US, Canada, maybe New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. And that number was somewhere in the low 80%. But when they asked women that question, who do they think, what's the percentage of men that are allies to women? This was specific to women. It varied by ethnicity, but white women, it was in the 40s, and for Hispanic and Asian and African-American women, it was in the 20s. So there's this big difference in perception, if you will, about what we think we're doing versus what others think we're doing. And so I know, Karen or Candice, you asked the question about what's an ally. For me, that says constantly ask yourself, are you really doing what you think you're doing? And the only way to really find that out is to ask the people who are living it. So, but that stood out to me, that those data points stood out to me. So.
Thank you for sharing. And certainly as a person of color, female of color, looking at that data and actually having some other exercises around that It was really interesting to have those conversations with folks around the room, if I could just add that. Just to share really what John just said, right? You may think you're showing up in one way, but it's really important to ask the question of others so that you can really validate, that you are, or where there are opportunities for you to show up even more. So thank you for that, John, really insightful. And thank you for allowing me to throw that question in, especially on the heels of us being at that conference. So let's transition and share how we began to engage another critically important advocate on this journey. So WIT is the Women Influencing and Impacting Toyota BPG, and that's a business partnering group at Toyota. So externally, you would know that as an ERG. So Susan, I would like to invite you into the conversation to tell us a little bit more about WIT and really how we've engaged you and WIT in the process of our journey to male allyship.
Absolutely. Thanks, Candice. So WIT's mission is to really develop women at Toyota through education, support, leadership development, and it's the largest employee resource group in all of Toyota when we measure it from a North American perspective. There are 17 chapters across North America, including Canada and Mexico, and there's nearly 4,200 members, both men and women, in those 17 chapters. But here in Plano, we actually have the largest BPG in all of the company at nearly 1,400 members. So obviously it's very strong and very important to us at Toyota headquarters to support the women in the workplace. And I was given the opportunity to serve as co-chair of the Plano chapter for 2 years, along with Frank Noel, who unfortunately could not be with us today. And what happened for us was that, John started his journey of how can he support women at Toyota, went into our diversity group to say, what can I do? And the diversity team then approached Frank and myself as co-chairs of WIT to say, we have executives that want to support women. You're supporting the employee resource group of women at Toyota. Let's partner together and really find ways to multiply our impact and show that there is male support at the executive level for the women at Toyota. So long story short, we were able to partner with these executives like John and Tom and another one of our great executives, Mark Taggart, who really wanted to figure out ways to be able to walk the walk and support the women at Toyota. So that was our way into this new frontier of really walking that walk.
Fantastic. And so, I think it's no mistake that we shared that statistic, right, about what the workforce looks like in terms of our college graduates. So this was a critically important connection. And we also wanted to elevate the fact that even though it is women, a female BPG, that we've got a significant amount of male allies that served as chairs, that continue to serve as chairs of WIT, that are very active and very engaged. So thank you for sharing that and sharing, your part of the story as we kind of move through. I also want to ask you though, Susan, as the other female on our panel discussion, what are some of the ways that male allies can show their support and advocacy to women and people of color in the workplace?
I mean, there's a whole spectrum of things that can be done. I think the first thing is join your women's employee resource group and show up to the events and ask how you can help. Other ways, and I know that John and Tom will talk about ways that they've specifically done things, but ask the questions about the women that you work with. Ask them if they feel you're being an ally. Ask them their opinions. If you're in a meeting and it's being a male-dominated conversation, can you, talk across the table to a woman and specifically call out, Candice, what's your opinion on this subject? There are so many different ways that, maybe you think that's a small way to participate, but sometimes a woman may not feel comfortable speaking up on her own based on her past experiences, but being asked a question directly might be a huge way to open the door for more women to participate and actively speak up. And I think that's one of the easiest ways that you can support women.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And I can say that again, drawing on some of the conversations that I had last week at the Better Man Conference, it's just that small opportunity that when those doors open, it's just as simple as asking the question and inviting the women, into the conversation, into the room, into the decision making as appropriate. Those seemingly small actions really pay dividends and really kind of build and foster the relationships from there. So we've talked about how we were introduced to the Better Man movement and conference, and really how we were able to leverage a natural connection with our ERG WIT. So now I'd like to shift our conversation a bit and share how one of our business partners has joined the efforts and really begun to engage his team. So Tom, tell us how you became involved in the Male Allies Initiative.
Thanks, Candice. Yeah, so for me, it really came forward as we made our transition here to Plano, going through the One Toyota move and some of the organizational realignments that we were having to do as part of that. Taking a look inside our own organization as in a technical, our area of the business is a little specialized and technical, and has had historically some challenges recruiting females and a diverse population into our ranks over time. We've had to be really intentional about trying to do that from a recruiting perspective. But what we were also noting, we had a retention problem. And so as we were looking at adjusting the organization or realigning the organization, we didn't have as many candidates for leadership positions in diverse populations that we really should have. We did not look like the rest of the company. And that was an opportunity for us. And I began looking, where can I learn more about how to solve not only that issue, but look at my retention problem overall. And really I got to do a better job. We have to do a better job at developing the talent we have and making our environment more inclusive so people want to stay. Mm-hmm. For me, I was really fortunate as John and Susan and others had discovered the Better Man Conference. I heard about it through Tatsumi and some others in our HR team, and wanted to see for myself. And frankly, it was eye-opening for me to not only hear from experts in the DEI practitioner field, but also from a number of businesses who were seeing some of the challenges we were, like Intel and others who were attending the conference and talking about not only some of the struggles or challenges, but also what they were doing to execute improvements in their own operations.
Okay, fantastic. And so how have you been able to, so it's important to really kind of reflect and see where there are opportunities, right? You mentioned retention, you mentioned development. How have you been able to pull others into this journey from a Male Allies perspective, Tom?
For me, it's been get men talking. I think that's one of the things I pulled out of the Better Man Conference is we need to talk about it, not only about our own biases and understandings of the challenges that we're facing, but also what's going on and how to act differently, how to be more intentional, how to maybe get uncomfortable and be okay acting differently. I guess maybe this is another plug for Jennifer. As I went to that conference, which was maybe, I don't know, the second or third time Toyota had went, I got to meet Jennifer myself, and she had just released a book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader. And really a good book. And actually for us in the technical realm, I really liked it because it's very process driven. It's talks about mapping the process for developing as a leader. But I took the book back and I bought 20 copies. And I offered, so I told all of our senior managers about this experience I had at the Better Man Conference. And I held up the 20 copies of that book and I said, anybody who wants one, I'll give you a copy. And we're not starting, a book club or anything, but what I wanted to do was I opened it one-on-one or as a group. Come talk to me about what you think you find in this book that you agree with or even disagree with, but let's talk about it. So that was great. And then I made some really good connections with a couple of our senior managers who really wanted to grow as inclusive leaders, but also talk about the challenges of male allyship. So that was a good learning opportunity for us. And then subsequently, we've also been working through the Male Allies pilot here at Toyota for some other members out of our group. And we brought that back in, and another one of our leaders started essentially a group of men in leadership positions to talk about the opportunities in their organizations, but also the challenges in promoting male allyship and how we do that in our space. That's been really good. And that wasn't my idea, but I was glad to go to that as we had started that a year prior and be able to share my own experiences with managers in other parts or other levels in the organization. And frankly, get a little vulnerable myself and talk about where I struggled with it. So if leaders are telling other leaders where they struggle or asking for help from other leaders, I think as particularly male leaders, we can learn from each other, and some of us just got to take that risk, get out there a little bit.
Thank you, John, for sharing that vulnerability and just the piece of bringing the learning back and really turning those learnings into action, right? I think that's critically important. And I was actually excited. I thought you were starting a book club. So I got a little excited about that, but just the fact that you offered it and, in a very non-threatening way, right? Like, hey, this is what I learned. Here are some of my vulnerabilities, and here's a resource that we can, kind of use to work through this together. So again, just those simple things that can be done to bring people along the journey, I think are just important nuggets for you all to take away. John, what are some of the ways that you've been able to bring others along this journey?
Well, it's funny. I think, what the way that Tom did it, and I would argue the way that I do it is different, and that's okay, right? Everyone's going to bring it a different way. I even see a couple names on the call here that women I've had the good fortune to work with over the years. I think for me, it's one, I'm not a marketer. So I don't think you can market this. If you market it, I think you run the risk of people questioning your integrity or authenticity on it. So for me, it's about how you act. And Candice mentioned this, is I think for me, it had to become, I'll call it intuitive. Just last week when we were talking to some folks, unfortunately, I don't speak another language, but the people I know who do say you don't translate, you just think in that language. And I would argue that maybe this is something like a language, and you need to think in this language so that you recognize if people aren't included in a conversation, or you try to get them comfortable in the conversation. And it's a delicate balance at first, I would say, from my perspective, because every one of us has an experience where maybe we don't trust somebody. So you tell me you want to hear what I'm thinking and you want me to part of the conversation, but I know that's dangerous. And so for me, it was this constant over and over again to make them understand and believe that I really did want to hear what they had to say, and their contribution was important. And so I think each person needs to find their own way to do it. And some are more formalized. As Tom points out, Jennifer's book is really good, and Jennifer was the one who inspired me to get engaged. Mm-hmm. But I'm more of perhaps I like to think I'm perhaps more subtle. So, but I think the key, and this is a term that I think is overused, is authenticity. But in this case, I think it's real. It has to be real for you, just like for me, how I got to here matters on how I I present or try and engage others. And I will say it's grown beyond just women. It started as behave better and encourage women to get involved. But at Toyota, we have made it actually more than that. And it's really just allies. I'll argue it's allies of everyone. And so it's become a bigger thing than that. But yeah, I don't like to be on stage, as Tatsumi knows, so I'm a bit uncomfortable in this position, but one-on-one, I think I do pretty good. So.
Well, I have had the great fortune, John, of working with you from day one back to our days in Chicago. So I thank you for getting on the broader stage and just sharing your story, and also really underscoring the importance of modeling the behavior so that, as we are trying to gain momentum or continue this momentum, we're kind of breaking down the trust barrier, right? And people we're building trust, but making sure people understand that, hey, listen, I'm modeling this behavior because it's authentically who I am. So thank you for all you've done in that space.
One thing, can I throw one more thing in there?
Please,
Candice?
Please do.
I do think it's important, is that while those of us try, in this case, Tom and myself, as men trying, please recognize that we will fail. And we are terribly flawed human beings. So when we make mistakes, help us overcome them, because they will happen. And so whatever allies that you come across in your path, please recognize that. I know I would say women and people of color have already sacrificed a great deal. So it's hard for me to ask for more, but please help us when we need help.
And I think, thank you for saying that too, John. I think that also really illustrates the importance of building that trust so that there is space for grace, right? We're all going to make mistakes. We don't have all the answers. And that's why conversations like this are so important. So we can continue to learn from each other. It may be one little nugget or a few nuggets that folks gained today that they didn't think of before. But no matter what it is that we're doing, we are all trying. And as long as we're doing so with the right intention, we just need to extend grace to folks. So thank you for sharing that as well. So I think before we turn it over to questions, I will just ask the panel if there's do you guys have any other closing thoughts before we transition to questions? Or?
Yeah, Candice, I'd like to add that vulnerability breeds authenticity. And I think the conversations that I've had as the co-chair of WIT and finding ways that we can support women in the workplace, I've had a lot of one-on-one conversations with male executives that have said, what do I do? How do I help? And one thing that we did here in Plano was we set up a panel of all men to speak to the WIT chapter, but we asked those men to please publicize this panel amongst your peers, amongst your work groups, so that we can reach a broader audience, because women, we know that we're supported, and here's the ways that these key executives are supporting, but if we could get a bigger audience and show the other senior executive male leaders that your peers are up here being vulnerable and being authentic, it then creates that momentum that then goes across the entire company, and it starts these conversations in a way that's more authentic and genuine. And so we were so grateful for the men, including Tom and John, that sat on that panel to talk about what they do and show examples of how they are male allies for women. And we appreciate that.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, definitely bringing others along is important. That's why I wanted to make sure I asked the question, how have you brought others along? Not always easy. We know that this is not something that everyone believes in, but again, back to that modeling the behavior and being authentic in doing so, kind of chip away at those folks that aren't all the way there. So Tom, John, anything else to add?
Yeah, Candice, I might add, it's a really important point that Susan just shared with putting people out there and stepping forward to be an example. Bringing people into this conversation, but more importantly, going beyond conversation to action, we really have to acknowledge that everybody starts at a different place, and that's okay. And if we can make incremental progress individually, we're going to all advance, and that's where I come back to really engaging. I've been telling our managers, find a friend in this place. If you don't want to talk in the group environment that we're enabling, that's great, but find somebody to talk to. And I think as a manager or a leader, or an ally at all, we're all in different places and you're going to grow, right? It doesn't matter. We don't all have to get here tomorrow, but we all have to move. And if we keep talking and we keep sharing, as John said, and course correct us once in a while, or each other once in a while. That's where I think it's about finding a friend or a trusted confidant that can take you aside and go, hey, you didn't handle that right, or you could have done this and that would have been so much better. It goes a long way. It really does. And I'm fortunate for folks like we have here, John and Susan and Frank, who's not with us, you and Tots to do that for me. But I'm trying to move that down a level and across the organization to have these confidants around. And I think that's going to help us all.
No, thank you for sharing that, Tom. We definitely cannot go from here to there overnight. John illustrated that when we talked about the fact that 5 years ago, he was the lone person, right, representing Toyota at Better Man. And here, 5 years later, we had close to 60 people attend in person and virtually. So it takes time, it takes intentional conversation, it takes sharing best practices and kind of tapping some of your friends along the way to encourage them to join the effort. So definitely want to thank the panel today for their time. Everyone is busy. I'm sure everyone on this call is very busy, but just this really speaks to the importance of the work that we're doing and our opportunity to share it with folks in the community. So we definitely appreciate your time and attention today. I also want to add that, 5 years is not a long time, right? So our journey is evolving. So it started as a grassroots effort, and we're continuing to benchmark. We've got surveys out from the folks who went last week. We're already having conversations with some folks about what can we do next? How can we do it better? As Tatsumi kicked off the call, like at Toyota, our culture is never best. It's always better and better. And we're always, I'll teach some of you a new Japanese term today. We're always looking for ways to kaizen, or continuously improve that which we are doing, right? So we thank you for coming along our journey today and just hearing kind of where we started and kind of where we're headed. And so at this time, I will turn it over to questions, or maybe back to Heather.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, you guys are fantastic. Very engaging conversation personally on my end as well. I do have our first question in the chat. It's to John, and I know that you did speak on this, but maybe just providing more specific or tangible examples. But John, as a male ally, can you provide examples of how you exhibit male allyship? If you maybe have a specific example, again, maybe just tangible.
Sure. I'll go with this example. I don't remember how many years ago it was when this effort started to expand. I was asked of, hey, who are some men that you think would benefit from this conference? And the easy answer would be to be much like that data I cited earlier, would have been said, well, I think these people are, these men are the ones that should go. But what I did instead is I wrote down a list of women who I thought over the years I had gained enough of their confidence and trust to ask them the question. And I gave them each 2 votes, because the question was, give me the names of 2 men. So I asked them to vote, and they voted, and they gave me the people that they thought exhibited that behavior already. So the easy answer would have been, someone asked me, and much like that 80% who thinks we're engaged, and the women think it's much less than that. I actually went out to the women and asked them, who do you think exhibits this behavior already and would benefit from this event? And so that for me, maybe that's a subtle way to do it, but I could have easily, there were names in my head, but instead I asked the women who I thought would be quite candid with me, and they were brutally candid. So yes. So I hope that's a helpful example.
Yes, I do. I laughed because I do think you have to be okay with the brutally honest. So appreciate that from you.
They were.
Which is good. That shows that they felt comfortable and they clearly trusted you with that. Thank you, John. I have a follow-up, probably to all of you, I guess, and maybe Candice can talk more about how Toyota has gotten involved, but how or where can our participants on the call find out more about events like Better Man Conference? Like, how do they get plugged into that space to start hearing about these events, to start pouring into themselves and their teams?
So I'll definitely start. If I'm not mistaken, and I can follow up with you, Heather, to get the exact information out, but the Better Man Conference, I believe, is the bettermanmovement.com. And so that would be a great place to start in terms of getting information. The CEO is a gentleman by the name of Ray Arata. It's spelled A-R-A-T-A. And he actually just wrote and published a book by the name of Showing Up. So we all just got copies of that last week. And a lot of what he discussed, even in a breakout session with us the next day, really centered around his book and his movement. So that would be the first place that I would start as it relates to Better Man. And then Jennifer Brown Consulting is another resource, because that's who we met, right? Ray and the Better Man movement through, just in terms of getting more information and as it relates to inclusivity as a whole, right? Jennifer is a great resource in terms of starting there. And I don't know if anyone would add anything else.
Candice, I would throw out, Jennifer does a podcast that I listen to quite a lot, and I've been introduced to other books or things that I wouldn't maybe have come across on my own. But checking in with that.
Agreed. And Jennifer, I read her books as a chair of an ERG. She talks a lot about how ERGs are benefits to businesses. So when you look at it from a strategic perspective, if you are building ERGs in your company, or if you have existing ERGs, there's a lot of information in there that helps you speak the language of how this will impact profitability, employee engagement. And it's a way to get a lot of sponsorship from your executive level, from your C-suite, because you can speak the language of why ERGs are good for the company.
I think that's an important point, Susan, because there will be some of us in the population who think this is just being a good human being, but some others need to be convinced with some numbers. And so to Susan's point, Jennifer does a really nice job on that. And she brought a number of that data, her and her colleagues brought a number of that data to us last week when we were in San Francisco. So she's very powerful, I think, to listen to and read.
Was very helpful. I did some searching. So for those of you on the call, I will confirm with Candice that I have the right info before I send it to you and lead you on a rabbit trail. Thank you for that. I have another question. Great question. So this is really probably for all of you. It might be more stems towards John and Tom, but what other steps have you taken to reduce barriers faced by parents, women, minorities, such as things we're seeing now, like flexible work hours, remote working, maternity leave, and just the ever-ending struggle of work-life balance?
Well, I can start with, I'll say if there has been a benefit or a beneficial silver lining to some of what we experienced with the COVID pandemic. It's been an all new look at how work-life balance really can operate, and how hybrid work can bring flexibility that people need and have always needed, but really needed during the pandemic. But now we proved we could do it. So we had to prove we could do it by shutting down and all going home and trying to keep things running. But now, at least here in our organization, we fully embraced a hybrid model where you are on site and working with your team when you need to, but you're flexible to work remotely or at other locations as needed as well. And looking at results, not just proximity or location in terms of your effectiveness. So I think that's been huge for women and others who needed that flexibility all of us need that flexibility, frankly, but some more than others, but we've been able to prove we can do it, and we're putting it into practice regularly right now.
Mhm.
I'll say for me, it's to try and personalize it to some degree. And what I mean by that, for example, I'm not a parent, but they're elderly, they have a number of challenges. There are things that come up, and everyone has them, whatever they might be. The data suggests a number of challenges for women as a result of the pandemic. Understand, at least on a human and personal level, when I think when we look at people as groups, we have a tendency to throw them into certain categories. But if you, whatever, my experiences with my in-laws, but if I need some time or I need some flexibility and it's important to me, then it's likely someone else has some requirement as well, and just try and remember that. So when they say I need time, or I don't feel well, or I'm burned out, one of the things the lines from last week, Candice, as you'll remember, was if people tell you something, believe them, right? That's how they feel. Believe them. Don't challenge it. Don't question it. Don't just say that's where they're at. And Tom mentioned this earlier, is you have to meet them where they're at, because that's how you want them to meet you in most cases, I think, as well. So if someone tells you they need help or they have a challenge at home, believe them and work around. Most of us, I think, find that when we reach out to our colleagues for help, they're happy to help. One of the things that the data points out as well is we as men often think we know everything and we don't ask for help. That doesn't mean we don't need it. So, that's my take, is, I try and personalize it and say, hey, there's times when I need a break, or I need some help, or I need some flexibility. And so it's likely others need it as well. So.
Very helpful. Susan or Candice, did you guys have anything to add to that, or even maybe just your experience with that in leaders in past?
Yeah, I would just share that very similar to John's situation, for example, personalizing my story. So when I came here to Texas, I actually brought my parents along, and I have a next generation home. And so there are many times when I am called to, my dad doesn't drive anymore. My mom is almost 80, so she's driving less and less. And so in a lot of ways, the roles have reversed. But I'm grateful that through the transparency of the conversations that I'm able to have with my leadership team and those around me, we're able to really just kind of step in and get it done, without disclosing Frank's personal, business. Literally, moments before this call, we learned that Frank, one of our panelists, had an emergency. And so we're all able to just pivot and step in. And that's just the nature of our culture. That I'm really grateful to say, in my experience, that has been the nature of our culture. And it starts with, as John said, personalizing it and getting to know folks' situations. I can tell you there are many times that, because I've had to step away during the day, I'm working even later at night, because I'm grateful to have had that opportunity to care for my parents, do what I needed to do during the day, and then come back, at a time later in the evening or what have you. And I'm not saying that's everybody's, some people get up early, whatever it is. I'm just grateful to have that flexibility. But it really starts with having conversations, building those relationships, and understanding where people are so we can meet those needs. And so I think someone else mentioned it. These last 2 years really normalized this playing field for all of us. And so we've learned how to pivot and step in and do things that we just didn't think we were capable of doing, but we're doing it, and we're proving we're doing it well.
One of Jennifer Brown's topics that she talks about a lot is called covering. And that was, being who you are at work is not necessarily who you are in your own home and personality. And I think with the COVID pandemic and us having to work from home and being on calls, and I have a 5-year-old who wasn't always at daycare during a call, and he'll come into my office, and people have seen that. I think what the benefit, again, there are a few benefits that came out of the pandemic, was we are able to be our more authentic selves at work. People know that I have a 5-year-old. People know that my boss may have an aging parent at home, but it enables us to be more of who we are and remove some of that covering. And I think that's been a really great thing that's come out of this. And it's enabled us to be our authentic selves and know that everybody's got a challenge. It may not be young kids, it may be teenagers that have events, or it may be elderly parents that need to go to a doctor's appointment, but we all have something in our lives. And having the flexibility that we have now has been such a great gift for many of us.
Thank you both.
It's funny, Susan, if I can remind me something that Jennifer Brown said like this when this first happened is, so a lot of people think they like to say we're all in the same boat. And I think she said we're all in the same storm, but we're all in different boats. So recognize that, you know, people are in different boats.
I like that. I like that a lot. So we have one more question. I think this might be our last one just for sake of time, but it is a great question. So it's to everyone. And it is, if you or I were having a one-on-one conversation and I asked you, what is your hot topic around male allyship? And then what is one thing I can do to address that topic?
I think for me, it would be, what have you done to support women? And having you really reflect back on that to say, here's where I've shown up. And then maybe we'll have an organic conversation about other ways to do it. I'd like John to answer it next, because I know, John, you and I have had conversations about how you've been targeting women to look at for promotional opportunities and helping them get to where they need to be the candidate for promotion.
This is a tough one for me, Susan. This may bring you back to a conversation you and I and Frank had many years ago there in Plano, when the question was posed to me, what should women do? And I don't know if a woman or a man asked this question. I will tell you, it's really difficult for me, especially as a white man. I have to remind some of my colleagues that think I'm still middle-aged, that I technically think I'm early elderly. But so here's the white early elderly man giving advice to women. I'm not sure that women need any more advice from someone like me. So it's a difficult question for me to answer. What I will say this is that, and Candice, this was a line also from last week, is like, what's the legacy that we want to leave? I don't know who said it, but someone out there said it's, people won't remember necessarily what you said, but how you made them feel. And so for me, and you know, I'm always tempted when I see names on the list here that I've worked with over the years. I'm not going to do that to them in this format, but listen, all right. They will, once you get them comfortable with you, they will tell you what they need from you. And so it's, I don't know what else to say in that. I try and listen. I fail often, but they keep coming at me, so that's good. And it's difficult for me to say to tell people what to do, except I think I need to tell myself, just try and remember to listen.
And, you know, that's kind of along the lines of what I was going to share, is like, I think that just allowing an opportunity for the women and the people of color on your teams and your lives to have space to talk, right? Asking them how they're doing. So much has happened in the last couple of years. It's not even just been the pandemic, right? There have been social injustices and political unrest at heights and at levels that we've really just not seen, but it's all happening at once. And sometimes it's just checking in with your folks, seeing how they're doing. And on top of that, being observant, because you know your people, right? If someone who's normally very verbose and speaking a lot gets quiet, or their behavior or personality changes in any way, tap in and just ask, how are they doing? Check in. And then also being available to provide resources, right? And then working with each individual on a situational basis, right? So there's no peanut butter spread. It's really taking the time to get to know your folks and understanding what their needs are. So a little bit more, I think initially I was thinking open door, but it's beyond the open door. It's you getting out and taking the time to get to know your folks and understanding what their needs are.
I'll build on that. For me, the hot topic is it's not enough to be aware or understanding that male allyship is necessary. We need action. We need to be active. So if I'm having a one-on-one, back to the question, if I'm having a one-on-one with a male leader or males in my organization, I would say you need to do something, not just understand it or talk about it. But, and even if it's incremental, like I said, people are in different places, but you need to do something. If I'm having that same conversation with females in my organization, it's help us and nudge us along or ask or talk. We need to know, because I want our space and our environment to be welcoming and successful for everybody. But sometimes I don't know. And to your point, Candice, we need to talk about it so we know what to do, because it's not going to be the same for everyone.
Yeah, the line I'll share for the people that have worked with me over the years, and this goes back to, it takes a long time to earn it and to get their confidence. I always say to them, if you see me driving off a cliff, don't presume that's my intention. So, but it takes, right? You have to prove it to them that you really want to hear it. It doesn't mean you always agree, right? But I think there always has to be room for the argument, and they need to be comfortable making that argument. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes years in many cases. So.
That was all beautifully said. Thank you. We're getting lots of just thank you for having this conversation in the chat. So echoing that to you all. I know we are actually right at time. So I just want to say thank you all again for joining us. Thank you to our panelists from Toyota for joining us, and wanted to remind everyone, not that you probably didn't know, but it's election day. So just make sure you get out there and vote if you haven't already done so. Thank you again to our sponsors, our presenting sponsor, Toyota, our fellow sponsors, Capital One, Frito-Lay, and SMU for making programs like this possible. We will send a follow-up email from those questions as well to make sure you guys have some additional resources, and this recording will be shared as well. But you guys have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us.